Hi, I'm Cameron Archibald, and you're watching The Full Scottish. Richard and Suzanne aren't here today, so I'm taking over the show. I'm joined by three great guests. We have Sarah Masson or Mason? Masson, who is one of the leading campaigners against a two-child cap policy. We have Simon Pia, who's a journalist and a lecturer and commentator, and also Chris Stephens, who's MP for Glasgow South West. Today we'll be discussing issues on Corbyn, federalisation, independence, rape clause, and we'll also be discussing defence, budget and shipbuilding. So without further ado, let's go on with the show. So let's kick the show off with news we've heard this week. First of all, let's maybe talk about Russia, or you want to talk about the Syrian airstrikes. Where do you want to begin the show? Any stories you guys got? Kick things off.
You've been down in Westminster.
Well,
so
I think it's been an interesting week. I think in terms of Syria, I think it's quite clear that the public certainly felt that Parliament should have been recalled earlier, at least to debate the airstrikes and what should happen. And I think that a concern that I have, Cameron, is that this has really been the first major military action since the publication of the Chilcot inquiry, which did make recommendations about what government should do, and primarily those recommendations should be to build public support, but also to ensure that there is legal advice available that is open to debate or challenge. And what we've seen, I think, was and what troubles me is that the government have moved away from the recommendations of that inquiry because they published legal advice afterwards, and they had no intention of recalling Parliament prior to the airstrikes. And I think that when we're dealing with a complex, multi-layered situation as we have in Syria, where Parliament consented to Daesh, that there should be action against Daesh, we're now taking action against Assad. And the UK seems to be allowing Turkey to do what it likes to the Kurdish community, and I think that troubles me. I think that certainly, from an SNP point of view, I think that there was clear support for our position, which was that the airstrikes shouldn't happen. And I think the big concern we have is, as well as the similar mistakes that were made after strikes in Libya, is that there's no game plan or there's no strategy for what happens.
It wasn't just you as well, because in the Lib Dem conference there was also people highlighting things. Joe Swinson, herself, she came out and said that no matter your opinion on the issue, Parliament should have been advised. And we had a German parliamentary report saying that these airstrikes themselves were illegal. So are we essentially seeing a repeat of the past?
Yeah, I think it was a sign of May's weakness. She wanted to rush it through quickly. Yeah. She's also very evidently just following America's lead. I think what is so clear, it's sort of the UK government's post-imperial, neo-imperial delusions that Britain is still... And we all know that in the Middle East, what is happening in Syria, it's all about the US, Russia, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf State. But Chris's point, I mean, this is... I think, has Parliament learnt nothing? And what disappointed me most during this, and I think Labour, the SNP and the Lib Dems are all coming from a similar place in this, but I was struck by how the media reverted to the cheerleading, flag-waving, banging the drum jingoism of the Iraq War back in 2003. And, I mean, you sort of think, do people learn nothing? And the knee-jerk reaction, particularly from commentators, calling for, just go in, bomb Assad. And Assad, once again, you demonise a figure like Gaddafi got it, Saddam got it, now Assad's getting it. And really, you sort of almost think, God, this is history repeating itself, tragedy, farce, how long is it going to go on? And Britain is really irrelevant in all of this, I would say.
Yeah. Before we quickly move on, let's discuss the Windrush generation, because as we know this week, May has apologised for the fiasco that's happened, with people being deported, as she says, in error, which is quite something. What do you make? Do you believe that it was simply an error of a mistake, or do you believe it's down to the policy?
I believe it's down to the policy and the running of that department, and I don't see any department that's fit for purpose being able to accidentally deport people. There's clearly something going on, and there's something wrong with how that department functions, and I don't think it's acceptable to just come in and apologise for what has been tragic for so many people and that has seen their lives turned upside down.
So,
I
would
think
you like to
Well, I think any member of Parliament, no matter what political party they're in, who have dealt with immigration cases, and we deal, certainly my office does, because we've got a number of asylum seekers in the southwest of the city. But it's quite clear that the Home Office policy is very hard line. It always assumes the worst, always assumes that people are not telling the truth. I've seen decisions in the past where there's been a refusal on the basis that the person has come into the country with a false passport. Well, of course, that's why the person managed to escape their country of origin in the first place, is they have a false passport. So you have to understand these things. But certainly, I think it's very serious what has taken place. That material cards have been, have been scrapped. People no longer have the information to prove that they're UK citizens. I think it's extremely serious, and I think that someone will have to resign over this. I think that is quite clear. But I think that what I think that has to happen is there has to be a far more compassionate attitude from the Home Office, particularly around individuals who are fleeing their country of origin and want to come to Scotland and or the UK to rebuild their lives and make a contribution to our society.
Yeah, I'd been speaking to my students about the anniversary of Enoch Powell's famous Rivers of Blood speech, and I was trying to say how Britain has moved on so much since then, and how race is no longer. But this has given me a slap in the face, my complacency, and I've been tweeting on social media about this. I think it shows that institutional racism is still inherent in the British state. Theresa May famously said, we must not be considered a nasty party. I think it's given an insight into Theresa May. There is a nasty core to this woman. Amber Rudd, who's supposedly a liberal Tory, she was promising me, the leaked document, I'll give more teeth to getting rid of immigrants. And I think it is, the whole thing has a really bad smell and quite disgusting. And I said, I'm somebody who's moved my position regarding independence. I think this is just another factor why I don't have faith in Westminster. And I would say, if you polled Scots, I think you'd get a very large majority who are opposed to the UK government's immigration policies.
Let's move on to the next topic now. Today we actually had the Sunday Herald running a story about how parties in Scotland were once again at heads and having a passionate debate about a federal UK. So let's just kind of take on the broader theme of this, the idea of Home Rule and federal UK. So Simon, we know the Labour Party have been a big advocate for the idea of a federal UK and Home Rule for Scotland. There's a long history of it. We have Labour backing it since the 1900s. Is there a difference this time? Should we believe there's a difference this time?
It was only dropped from the Labour manifesto in 1945. It's a post-war. The welfare state, all of that, and Labour has toed and froed sections of the party. There's still the one thing that everyone knows is Labour has been way behind the ball throughout the devolution process over the last 10, 20 years, and it's struggling to catch up.
They might argue, though, that they are the advocates, they're the ones that brought devolution into place.
Oh, they did, of course they did. Tony Blair rattled it through within 3 months of coming to power in 1997, but there was George Lord Robertson, former head of NATO's famous comments that this would kill nationalism stone dead. And the idea that he didn't see that devolution was a continual process, that was a big mistake that a lot of people in the Labour Party made. Now, what was interesting, when Jeremy Corbyn took over as leader, and I don't know how much Chris picked up with this down in the House of Commons, but the left of the party were quite relaxed about Scotland, let Scotland go its own way. And I know, and having spoken to Corbyn and people around him, that they didn't, you know, if Scotland wants independence, because we know where Jeremy Corbyn stands on Ireland, he would not stand against that. But basically the Scottish Labour Party pleaded with them, got down on their bended knees, and that was when we now had only one MP, Ian Murray, but Kes Dugdale and Ian Murray, and then various others, and begged them and said this could be the end of Scottish Labour. And this is all part of, I think, what is a real problem of Scottish politics, the tribalism that Labour and the SNP are so obsessed with being at each other's throats. The SNP might think the blame lies more with Labour, etc., but that's for another time to argue about that. But that's why Corbyn backed off. But once again, they haven't come up with anything concrete, what sort of a form of a federalism. You got the vow which I'm sure Chris will speak about when we come on to the Clyde side, and the idea of the ships getting out to tender with other countries, supposedly Clyde-built ships. But where we're going in this, you got the Smith Commission, you got the Scotland Act. I still think people think it's a pretty piecemeal effort, and it hasn't really changed anything very much. And I think we're in a hiatus at the moment. I'd be interested what Sarah and Chris think about this. Not a lot's happening, but I think once again there might be more of an upsurge towards the independence argument and debate as Brexit comes closer. I mean, just speaking about less than a year now, March 2019, but I'd be interested to hear the SNP's view as a parliament.
Well, I mean, I think, Simon, you're right about tribalism, but I would say that I mean, my experience of tribalism is probably less in Westminster because there's a common enemy that's in front of us who's governing. But I think you're right in terms of I think that Corbyn and his team have tried to learn from the Yes campaign and the upsurge in vote, and perhaps there was an element of that in June last year. But I think what the Labour Party continually fails to do is articulate what federalism is. And what kind of federalism it will be, because there will be some areas in England who will not want to be co-joined with other areas. We're already seeing some of that, an element of that, when local authorities are combining together. There's been some resistance to that. And let's not forget that there was a referendum in the northeast of England to try and create a northeast assembly that was rejected at that time. So I think that I'm presuming it's very much in development from the Labour Party side, but they are going to have to develop it and articulate it, and I don't really see that at the moment. And I think, to go back to Simon's point about independence and Brexit, I think we're already seeing the difficulties the UK government are getting into in terms of Northern Ireland, where you now have unionist farmers and fishermen who are very worried about what's going to take place in Brexit in terms of what it means for them. And it was fascinating for me listening to fishermen in Northern Ireland explaining that depending on the deal, they'll have to register a boat in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland because they fish south. So for someone who's used to Scottish fishermen having a different perspective to that, I thought that was fairly interesting. So I think that in terms of federalism, I'm not necessarily sure they would get the support south of the border for that in a way that they may get support here. And I think that what may happen with Brexit is I think that we'll get a point where people will say enough is enough. And I think that I'm confident we'll see an upsurge.
Sarah, do you personally think yourself that Brexit makes a federal UK more likely or less likely? And if so, or if not, why?
I would probably... The way things are going in Scotland and from the way the people that I've spoken to is from everything from the Scotland Act to federalism and the lack of clarity around what that is. I mean, we've seen people don't, I think the UK doesn't seem to be respecting what Scotland already has. We've seen that with the EU withdrawal bill having to go through. We've seen that the UK don't seem to respect what they've already devolved. So I don't think people have a lot of faith that if anything else was to happen, that the UK would be respecting that.
I think it would have to be an independent confederation of England, Scotland, Wales, and what happens in Northern Ireland or Ireland, but 4 independent but equal bodies in a confederation. Because even as SNP said during the 2014, there would obviously be lots of really strong links between Scotland and England, you know, no matter social, and obviously administrative links, just like there are exists is growing between the north and the south of Ireland at the moment. But I think Chris's point, I don't see. I think the problem is breaking up England into federal blocks. But Scotland civically, and even you see Esther McVeigh coming up to the Parliament last week, once again shows this divide between Scottish political culture and English political culture. And I think it's widening post the referendum. I think it's even widened even further.
Yeah. So if, let's just say, for example, there was a referendum, but there's a twist to it. Instead of having the status quo and independence, it was clearly set out a federal UK, vote no, or independence, vote yes. What vision do you think Scots would pick between them two? In the scenario, it's only them two and not the status quo. So independence or a federal UK, which right now, over time, if they had a debate, where do you think Scots would go? Because there is the argument that the idea that the more federal or the more powers that go to Scotland, the more likely it is to become independent, with the realisation of what we can do with those powers. But is there a case to that?
Well, I think it would be up to those who argue for federalism to make that case. It's not for, I don't think it's necessarily for me as an SNP MP and independent supporter to make the case for them. I think they would be surprised if I did. But no, I certainly think that what may happen in the next independence referendum is I think there will be a continuing debate about austerity and what is happening with that, and I think that I would like to see more of a targeting of what is reserved, and I think the different directions in which Scottish people would like to go on, for example, employment law, immigration, defence matters, foreign policy. And I think that we're seeing we're seeing a clear divide between Scotland and other parts of the UK on those issues.
I would like to make one point. I think if independence, it's a radical move. And I think a problem for the SNP in 2014 is they were not radical enough in what an independent Scotland would look like. And I think it's a problem for the SNP. They're not coming up with many ideas. I think a very simple thing, this is going way off the Scottish star, but bringing Syria into it. Northern Syria, where the Kurds are ruling it, they're going to make it the most gender equal.
Yep.
And they don't think of themselves as a nation state in the world, and we've all seen the Kurdish women fighting, which is quite amazing in the Middle East. Why do the SNP not say that Scotland would be the most gender equal country in the world? We'll top what Iceland is doing, but you don't see that, and I think it's a problem for the SNP, and I think you see, and I think maybe Chris can correct me on this. I think there's a bit of a divide, and it's quite ironic because Labour had this problem as a branch office. We were Westminster's branch office up here, but I think there's a bit of a divide between Westminster SNP and Holyrood SNP, and I'd call Westminster SNP a bit more radical, and I hear a lot of the comments that they're making, whereas basically the Scottish government is Nicola and Peter, the Murrow Sturgeons or whatever, who run the show, and I would say they are quite conservative with a small c, very cautious. And that was a criticism I also made of Alex Salmond. I thought because Alex Salmond was quite neoliberal on the economy, but people like Chris, I know Tommy Shepherd quite well. There's Brendan O'Hara, Mary Black, there's a lot of people, and they're definitely more radical, and they're more in tune with Jeremy Corbyn on a lot of policies than they are with, I would say, the Sturgeon-Salmond group that have been running the party.
Well, perhaps Jeremy's got more in common with us, Simon. Perhaps I can say, I think we'd be a bit naughty about that.
Just to have the final word on this topic. Come independence referendum, be it very soon or down in the future, and Corbyn comes up and says, I will definitely give you home rule this time. Do you think that could actually win over a lot of SNP voters? Because Labour argue that they've already won a lot of voters back to them with the last general election in Scotland because of Corbyn. So do you think he can bring working class SNP voters together and win another referendum for himself?
No is the answer that I believe. From we seen in 2017 snap election, possibly the worst Tory campaign I've ever seen, and Jeremy Corbyn still didn't manage to win. I think that it's up to them to make the argument strong and to make it convincing, because right now the people that I know and the people that I've spoken to and people who have changed their mind want Scotland to be able to decide things for themselves.
I think what we have to remember though about June 2017, and I think this happened right across the UK, is my analysis is it was 650 by-elections that were going on, because it was such a snap election, and people were actually ignoring the campaign that was actually on the TV and the media, and they were voting for other reasons. And I think the difficulty the Labour Party have is that they had a 5-week surge, and I've not really been able to maintain that. And certainly as someone who's down at Westminster, the battles that were taking place 2 years ago now seem to be bubbling under the surface and coming up again. Yeah. We've seen that with the anti-Semitism debate. We saw that with Syria, where there was different positions in the Labour Party. So I think it's a more fluid situation. I'm not necessarily sure, though, that so I don't necessarily buy the argument that Labour got all these votes back. Actually, what happened in Scotland was that there was so many elections. Turnout was down by a significant amount in June 2017. So it's not necessarily that Labour got all these votes back. I think the key problem the Labour Party in Scotland has is that there's still a mistrust from those who voted yes in 2014. There are still a lot of voters who would not trust and don't trust what the Labour Party say on any subject. And I think that's a real problem for them.
Well,
I'm going to have to end the topic there. We could be all day discussing this topic, I know.
I don't know whether Simon agrees with that.
That was a key point I was going to make about it.
Well, we're going to move on to the rape clause now. But before we do, we have a short video to show you, since one of our team was in Edinburgh at a time at a rape clause rally themselves. So let's take a look at what they found there.
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rape clause, well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget. There's a lot of competition for appalling Tory policies, but this really has to be one of the worst. And I think it's a real tragedy that in Scotland, where the Scottish Government has passed legislation and taken so many steps to try and assist and protect the victims of rape and sexual crime, that this good work should be overridden by Tory policies at Westminster. Of course, the Scottish Government was one of the first governments in the world to set up a specialist sex crimes prosecutors unit. I was very proud to be one of the founding members of that unit. And also, the Scottish Government has passed legislation to protect the victims of rape and sexual abuse as they go through the court system. But what the UK Tory government is proposing to do is to put these women through the ringer all over again by this policy, and it's completely unacceptable, and we must continue to fight it.
I'm really pleased to be here at the Mound in Edinburgh to protest against the Conservative government's policies, which are now a year old, of trying to limit tax credit benefits to 2 children in some of the poorest households in this country, and in particular against their policy of forcing women to prove that they have been raped in order to claim benefit for a 3rd child. This is probably the foulest public policy that this government, which is, as we know, prejudiced against the poor and the vulnerable in our society, but this is the foulest policy they have ever come up with. And there is a great deal of cross-party support here to force a U-turn on this policy, and today's demonstration is part of a nationwide campaign to make that happen. So I'm here to demonstrate my solidarity with the many people affected by this, and hope that we will soon get the policy changed.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today, and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rape clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rape clause was somehow double support for women, and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life. I'm really glad to see that the pressure is still being put on the UK government to answer for this ridiculous policy. And I think the more voices that we get together on this, the more pressure that we put, there is some hope that we can eventually get a U-turn and overturn both the two-child cap and the rape clause that stands part of it.
All right, so let's get back to the show. I'm going to start with Sarah, because you were one of the leading organisers the other day for a rally in Edinburgh, just outside the Scottish Parliament, am I correct?
No, it was on the Mound.
The Mound, sorry, my mistake, sorry about that. But the rally was about the two-child cap policy. It wasn't just about the rape clause. So what was your message overall then? It's not just about the rape clause, it's more than that.
No, the entire two-child cap policy needs to be scrapped. The rape clause is an exemption within that. You can't just scrap the rape clause, the policy still exists, and these women and men who are looking after more than 2 children will not have the support that they need. And it was to show everyone that this opposition is going nowhere. They implemented it in, I think it was the 7th of April 2017, and we said that we will go nowhere until this is done. And Alison Lewis down in Westminster has brought it up constantly at every opportunity she has had to ask them what they are doing about this. It's an unworkable policy in Scotland. Every women's organisation in Scotland, the Royal College of Nurses, the British Medical Association, to name a few, have all said that they will not act as third-party verifiers. So when Esther McVey or Theresa May stands up and says, oh, we just want to clarify that the DWP won't be filling out this form, I know that, done our homework. I understand what the policy is. I'm telling you that it doesn't work in Scotland and the policy should be scrapped.
Ruth Davidson might give you the argument. She said this with the last Scottish elections, I believe, that all it takes for the victim is to tick a box when it comes to the form. Is that true?
No, is the answer to that. There's an 8-page form where you have to name your child who's been conceived as a result of rape, and you have to sign the form. It's an 8-page document that has to be filled out, which she's seen numerous times. So to say that it's just to tick a box is completely inaccurate.
We've heard quite a lot of awful stories around this policy. We had Kezia Dugdale in the Scottish Parliament read out an email she received about someone contemplating suicide. How does a policy like this get implemented while missing the human element to this? Because someone literally contemplating ending their life with a policy by the government, it's almost unthinkable to think that's the case. We were in that scenario. How does that come about?
Well, it's a classic example of a UK government who continuously, even when it's pointed out to them, do not have a clue about what happens in a household who requires state support. Mm-hmm. It's a ludicrous policy. First of all, on the basis that you could that you think you could use a tax break system to stop people or trying to create 2-child families and no more. Just ludicrous. The 8-page form that's been referred to, ludicrous. The fact that women's support organisations have said they're going to boycott having anything to do with this policy, and actually, you know, the key practicalities of asking questions about whether DWP staff are trained on something like this. If you work for DWP, it's not a highly paid job. You know, in the front line, and you're confronted with a woman who says, "And I want to fill out this form." And it's a traumatic experience, and to ask someone to go through that traumatic experience again, talking to someone who they don't know, is just a ludicrous policy. So I think the rape clause does highlight just how ridiculous the 2-child tax credit policy is, and it needs scrapped.
I think what it also does as well, when we're going back to Kezia Dugdale's speech when she was speaking about a woman contemplating suicide as opposed to filling out this form, you know, that's not the only, I've worked with a lot of vulnerable people and trying to help them through the benefit system from the UK government. It's not the only policy where people are contemplating suicide because of the stress that the UK government are putting on people in the most vulnerable situations. And it's all as a result of austerity. They can make different choices here. They don't have to cap working tax credits. They keep saying as well that this policy is to balance out, so people who are not working and people who are working are making the same decisions. It's a working tax credit. And any policy that makes you accurately predict the next 18 years of your life, and completely be able to understand if someone's going to leave you, if someone's going to die, if you're going to be made redundant, You can't accurately predict 18 years of your life.
And I think this is key because I'm on the DWP Select Committee, and one of the next pieces of work we're going to be doing is on benefit sanctions. We took evidence that this week on split payments for universal credit, and we heard in private from those who had been victims of domestic violence and domestic abuse, and how universal credit, 6 weeks worth of money to a husband, or someone or a partner who's inflicting economic abuse on a woman, actually perpetrates that. So we're continuing to look, and I think it's a really good committee to be on, because we're testing the government all the time with reports. We've done it with PIP and ESA, and you'll see in the next few days the government's response to that is that they're yielding in some of that. But I think we need to continue to highlight, and certainly what I keep planning to do while I'm on the DWP Select Committee, is highlight just the impact that these policies have on individuals. And it's quite right to say that people are and have, sadly, either committed suicide, and there are people who are contemplating suicide as a result of being caught up in the benefit system.
But the idea that somebody has to go through the process again with some bureaucrat, having possibly gone through police, court, etc., who knows what they've gone through, but it's just, I think it's another key insight coming in the same week as the Windrush scandal about the mentality of this government, and our attitude is punitive towards, it's almost punitive towards people who are on benefits and punitive towards people who are immigrants.
Yeah.
And they're also trying to create a false split between the deserving poor and the undeserving poor, without actually describing what that is. But they are trying to split people, and I think that for me, when it comes to trying to blame immigrants for some of the things the government's responsible for, or poor people for what the government's responsible for, and so Simon's right, we need to continue to highlight that it's the government policy.
It's also how out of touch they are, and insensibly Esther McVeigh, what was it? It'll give you an opportunity to talk.
It would give women an opportunity to talk. The opportunity's there. It's not giving anyone an opportunity for anything. It is forcing women to choose between disclosing that they were raped, possibly for the first time, and poverty. It's not giving an opportunity, and it is not providing double support for anything. This support was there. They've taken it away. And then they're saying we'll give you it back as a goodwill gesture. This is completely it's a vile policy, and it's part of a package of benefit cuts, sanctions, that I think it's important to remember as well. 86% rather, of austerity cuts are being picked up by women. It's women who are feeling this.
Some Tories would argue that if it was such a horrible policy, that Holyrood could simply mitigate it. What is the truth behind that? Is it easy to mitigate off the top of your hand, or is it more?
Well, I don't think you can necessarily. I mean, I've heard Ruth Davison argue this line. How can you mitigate the rape clause? It just seems a nonsense.
It's also a ridiculous argument to be making. Holyrood isn't set up there to be putting a plaster over everything that the UK government does. There are hundreds of millions of pounds that the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government, rather, are forking out to mitigate against what Westminster are doing. They shouldn't need to. And this policy isn't just affecting people in Scotland. It's completely unworkable in Northern Ireland as well. Completely unworkable. Where if you're trying to claim this benefit and you have not already reported this as a crime, you are breaking the law. This is unworkable across the UK.
Yeah, so also it shows you the flaw in the Scotland Bill 2016, that certain welfare powers were shifted over, but this is not within the power of the Scottish Parliament to decide in the first place. So this is where Ruth Davison does her amazing reverse ferret and try to say, you can mitigate against it. But she brings it up often in Holyrood.
That debate that they had last year on the two-child cap was the most shameful debate I've ever seen in the Scottish Parliament. The Tories four Tories, I think, stood up, read out a pre-prepared script, took no intervention, didn't listen to anything that anybody had said, refused to answer any questions. They can't defend it. It's indefensible.
We're going to move on just now from this year's topic, but we're going to listen to John Rush. John Rush was here in studio earlier, where he gave a nice song titled Gold and Green. So I'll hand over to John just now to give the song.
Little angel came down today, said everything was gonna be okay, and all our dreams were baked and I let the booze of gold and green. You know I never even caught her name. Smiles glisten as we listen to the summer breeze, slowly slipping off her crown. Telling fables of all the people that she wished to meet, and who should get me there somehow. Till I say, kiss me like there's no one else around. Oh, me. Hold me back, I'll only let you down. When we was able and we were able as we'd ever be, as we sailed from cloud to cloud, the dawning faces on little patchworks of memory, then we fall without a sound. Till I say, kiss me, kiss me like there's no one else around. Oh, me, hold me back, I'll only let you down.
Welcome back. We're going to move on to the discussion now with shipbuilding and the Clyde. We had the Daily Record come up with a headline just the other day about jobs at risk due to the fact that the UK government, or the MOD, sorry, are possibly tendering contracts to other countries around the world. Chris, would you like to pick up on the headline and what the story really is?
I mean, it's came about as a result of a freedom of information request from the GMB trade union, and both the GMB and Unite Trade Unions are doing a fantastic job in promoting and highlighting the great work that's being done on the Clyde and shipyards, and indeed in shipyards not only in Scotland and the UK. I think what we're seeing here is a false dichotomy. or a false economy, I should say, because what's happening here is that despite those of us who are in the all-party parliamentary group in shipbuilding saying that it would be actually good if these Royal Fleet Auxiliary ships were built across the UK in the same way as the Aircraft Carrier Alliance was built, various shipyards block building, because these ships have similar tonnage. They claimed it would save money by sending these ships out to international competition, and similar ships have been built in Korea over the last 10 years, and there's been problems with those ships. So I'm very concerned about that. And the reason it's a false economy is that if these ships were built in the UK, then the government would recoup between 30 and 40% of the cost of those ships, purely from income tax and national insurance from the workers who are actually building the RFA fleet support ships for the UK. So, but it's just been a continuation, I think, of a rollback of promises that have been made to Scottish shipbuilding. On the Clyde, they were promised 13 Type 26s. Then it was 8 plus 5 Type 31 ships. But don't worry, you're still getting them. We're now seeing the Type 31 ships going out to tender across the UK with a determination from the UK government that they shouldn't go to the Clyde, which is a specialised shipyard centre of excellence, which the UK government decided under a Labour government that the centre of excellence would be on the Clyde. And so what we're seeing is a continued rollback of those commitments. Same as a commitment for a frigate factory, and the only person who thinks there's still a frigate factory was Michael Fallon, who was arguing at Westminster the frigate factory was up and running, whilst BBC Scotland were going round with trade unionists looking at the rubble of where the frigate factory should have been. So there's complete ignorance. But my concern for me is that the real potential of shipbuilding, not only in Scotland but across the UK, is not being realised as a result of idiotic decisions from the UK government.
Just help me out here a bit, because I remember when I was young in high school, still young, I see.
You are indeed.
But when I was in high school, I remember one of the big pledges by Better Together, or No Thanks, was that if you vote no, these kind of contracts could not be tendered to other countries.
Well, the argument that the UK government tries to suggest that Royal Fleet Auxiliary fleet support ships are not warships. Now, if you put a gun in a ship, there's an argument to be made that that is a warship. So I certainly don't see the sense in any ships being built abroad. I just don't see there's no economic sense to that. If you look at other countries, Germany has one specialised shipyard building warships. France, one specialised shipyard. Italy, one specialised shipyard. And in America, the size of the US Royal Navy, there are only 2 specialist shipyards building ships. So there is a real argument about what is a warship, but none of these should be getting built abroad.
Yeah, and also the UK is actually even more neoliberal than the US in tendering contracts, worldwide. Also, I saw some of the Tory argument at times about the EU. It's got to fall in line with EU tendering, but it doesn't, because it's a military. As Chris is making a distinction, what is a military vessel? And it is quite bizarre. You'd think that how this Conservative government likes to fly the flag, the Union Jack, dresses up in jingoism, that these vessels aren't automatically built in Britain. And you did say that the Labour government, Gordon Brown gave as a gift to Rosyth to build the Queen Elizabeth II, which we probably didn't need. Many people would argue it's quite archaic, but that was a great contract for Rosyth. I was over there, I knew people in the unions at Rosyth, but the point you made, I think most Scots felt it was part of the argument. They didn't read the fine print of what they were actually saying, but these jobs will go from the Clyde in an independent Scotland, and now they're going from the Clyde, and I think it is bad faith. I think it is bad. It wasn't implicit in the actual vow. The vow didn't mention defence specifically. The only thing the vow ever mentioned, the famous Daily Record, was specific about the NHS, that the Scottish Parliament would have the power to control spending on the NHS. But it was implicit in the campaign that Clyde jobs would be saved by being in the union, and that was the message. And now that is not the case, seemingly.
Yeah. Well, it's not just the Clyde. I mean, I think it is Rosyth. I mean, certainly, you know, Rosyth, for me, would have a place in helping block build these fleet solid support ships. It's similar tonnage to the Aircraft Carrier Alliance that they were involved in. So it is about saving shipyard jobs elsewhere. My view is quite clear that the Type 31s, which were supposed to be part of the original deal for 13 Type 26 ships, should be built on the Clyde. Now, what I don't understand from UK government is that there is a good story to tell about Type 26 being built in the Clyde. That's 20 years of work. But what I want to do, as someone who had shipyard workers in my family, is to have a sustainable industry going forward for decades to come. I want to see shipbuilding in the Clyde 100 years from now. Not just this feast and famine MOD defence procurement process that we have to go through now. I want to see, you know, a conveyor belt of ships being built to the highest standard, and the best shipyard builders in the world are, of course, based in the Clyde and Govan in particular.
The Defence Journal came out on Twitter when a lot of this was coming about on the Daily Record article, and they made the argument that, simply put, the Clyde and other yards such as Rosyth just simply can't make these ships. Is that true?
No, I think they're at it. I know the particular website you're referring to, and I think they are at it. The point is that the trade unions, and let's be quite clear, it's the trade unions who are arguing this position. The trade unions are arguing that you can build fleet solid support ships and block build them in the same way as you can build the Aircraft Carrier Alliance, and indeed the UK government want the Type 31s to be block built. So block building ships is nothing new to the industry, and the strong argument the trade unions are making, which I support and many other MPs across the political divide support, is that you can block build these ships, and that they can be block built in Rosyth, Appledore, in Devon, and other parts of the UK can block build these ships because it's been done before, it can be done again.
So, okay, let's talk about independence then, because you mentioned it before, and also as a big promise within the independence referendum. But if Scotland became independent, would there be a risk of job losses? I mean, the UK government could simply not contract Rosyth or Clyde or any...
Well, who would build the argument would go back to then, Cameron, is who would build our ships? The UK government have decided that the centre of excellence for building complex naval warships is on the Clyde. That has been the case for at least a decade, and probably more. So who else, there is not the skills or the capacity to build a complex naval warship elsewhere in the UK unless you transport all the workers in the Clyde to somewhere else in the UK, and I don't see that. I think it comes back to the point that's been made earlier, is that an independent Scotland would have to have a social relationship and a political relationship with other parts of the United Kingdom. We could build our warships, they could do things for us. That would be part of it. I think that what we need to do is make sure that we have a shipbuilding industry that's diverse, that's building good ships, right across. Doesn't have to be complex naval warships, of course, but the centre of excellence is there in the Clyde. The big mistake, actually, that's been made in the shipbuilding industry in the 1980s was Sir John Parker recommended to Margaret Thatcher that we should start building cruise ships, and she didn't see that there would be a commercial opportunity for the UK to do that. But Scandinavia did it, and look how well their shipbuilding industry is.
How well is their shipbuilding?
Well, their shipbuilding industry is very well. I mean, every cruise ship in the world has been built in a Scandinavian shipyard, so whether it's Norway, Sweden or elsewhere. And I think that that's the sort of thing that we have to do. I want to see the shipbuilding industry diversifying into those sorts of markets, because certainly in the Clyde we've got the skills and the capacity to do that.
Sarah, me and you aren't most well informed when it comes to shipbuilding, but in the political context of it, if there's another referendum and the No campaign come up again and say if you vote no, your jobs will be protected, do you think voters will, especially in Glasgow anyway, and by the Clyde and Rosyth, do you think they're more likely to buy that argument or less likely?
Of course not, after what they've seen. Of course not. Why would they have any trust when they've been lied to once? by the same people.
Simon, Labour have been quite strong advocates for the Clyde and Rosyth for a long time. Do you think that their kind of protection and, you know, patriotism for the Clyde itself, do you think it's wearing away? Do you think people are kind of seeing it's not really working out well?
I did mention how Gordon Brown ensured that, you know, Rosyth was well looked after. He protected it. I would argue that, I mean, as Chris knows, even during the independence referendum, there was mixed views among the unions on the Clyde about what would be more beneficial. But a few, I'm sure, though, quite a lot of Clyde workers voted no because of their jobs. It was personalised for them. But who's to say that Scotland, the Clyde, can't be competitive within the EU or globally? The Scottish government on its own going and saying, you know, we can build ships for you. I mean, I think there's a potential there, because if you can build warships or Type 26 frigates, you can build cruise ships, or you can build anything. And I'd also say, we'd just say to them, we'll keep the nuclear missiles, you know, if you refuse to do a deal with them. Because how are they going to get the subs back, you know?
Chris, that's a good question, actually. What would happen? I mean, I know it's not related entirely to shipbuilding, but it is, in a sense, they're both, you know, it's a military topic. What would happen with nuclear weapons within independent Scotland? Do you reckon it? Because there was an idea before that Faslane would just stay part with the UK and almost be sanctioned off from Scotland, or it could just simply would be somewhere put in Wales.
Well, I think you're asking questions that are way above my pay grade. But I mean, I think I'll give you my personal view. There's been a lot of research done by the STUC in particular around about Faslane and if Trident was to go, and certainly the job losses that some individuals claim would go as a result of Trident disappearing is very much overestimated. There's certainly capacity for Faslane to still be a navy yard and a naval base. So there's no need for I don't see there's necessarily a need for a closure. And I think that there's a potential there for an independent Scottish government to develop its navy, and its armed forces. So certainly, I think that the consensus in Scotland certainly is that we are opposed to nuclear weapons. We oppose this nuclear weapons arms race. And I think what's interesting is that I think even in America you're now seeing a debate about whether nuclear weapons should go, or certainly that there should be now some negotiation with the stockpiles of nuclear weapons disappearing. I mean, I think I read a book recently which is fascinating, that before Ronald Reagan stopped being the president, he wanted to do a no nuclear weapons deal with Gorbachev, and it was actually the American military that stopped him from doing that. So I think there's capacity to keep pushing that there should be no need for nuclear weapons. And any of the arguments that have been advanced for any country retaining nuclear weapons is very weak indeed. We've had Russian warships in UK waters, and the only reason the MOD found out about that was from Twitter. So we know these.
But the only country that decommissioned its nuclear capacity so far has been South Africa, because they were heading towards a bomb. But that's another thing why, you know, this, if Scotland is going to be an independent country, to go against this sort of militarist, I mean, that is not the selling point for an independent Scotland. You're speaking about Scandinavia and its flourishing shipbuilding market, totally non-nuclear. Yeah. I mean, the most healthiest societies in the world are non-nuclear. You know, I'd also like, if you're pushing the idea of independence, like, you don't develop chemical weapons are developed in England and sold to people. Yeah. And you look at also the arms business that is done with Saudi Arabia. Your Saudi Arabia and the Yemen, that's off the radar a bit with people. But does that have to be Scotland's future? I think there is I would suggest the majority of Scots would be happy without that as being part of our future.
Well, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Simon, Sarah and Chris, for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in. If you've been watching or you're watching later on, thank you very much. Before we go, I'd just like to see, if you want to see more of this, you can join us here 12 o'clock every Sunday lunchtime. Encourage others to come and see it, share the link if you want, and even better if you want, subscribe as well, and if you want to donate some money, that'll be brilliant, because it means that more shows like this can be produced, comedy, music, you name it, and you suggest it. But just now, before we head up, we're going to give a song by John Rush again. This one's titled The Wallflower. So again, thank you very much. Have a nice day.
The innocence of hope, solitude of fear, likes to hold you close but never hold you near. Your grin of understanding has the flowers in her hall, and her life seems so demanding. She's just gone on with it all. Giving up on love for coffee and TV. Let's just set her up, but never sets her free. Coincidences found her with the finer things in life. Looks like butter within metal, though her words cut like a knife. 'Cause she's on flower. She's on flower. Surrounds us like a bucket full of rain, and she may not dig your literature, but she'll love you just the same. 'Cause she's a flower. She's a